Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar called 2020 Tech Recruiting Benchmarks. My name is Sarah Kinsey, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm also pleased to introduce today's speaker, Nick Bushak, co-founder and CTO here at GEM. He will present benchmarks for each stage of the recruiting funnel. He'll show us how the data has shifted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he'll also offer some guidance on where to start if your numbers aren't up to par. But before I hand the mic over to Nick, there are a few housekeeping things I want to make sure we go over about today's webinar and the Bright Talk platform. First of all, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session today, and it will be accessible through the same link that you're using now. We've also added some attachments which are available in the Attachments tab at the bottom of your screen. There you can find slides from today's presentation, also the full report on the 2020 Tech Recruiting Benchmarks, and a few other reports and links that you might find valuable. I also want to call your attention I also want to call your attention to the link in the attachment section for our upcoming Talent Talk events. These are networking events for people in the talent acquisition space, and they've been very popular and a lot of fun. I'd love to encourage you all to take a look and join us at some point in the future. You can find the link to the registration page for Talent Talk in the attachment tab at the bottom of your Bright Talk player, so look for that link there. We'd love to hear from you during today's presentation, so if you have a question for Nick at any point, please feel free to send it through the Ask a Questions tab at the bottom of the player, and we'll be answering questions at the end of today's presentation. I expect that we're going to have a lot of questions, and we might not have time to answer them all, but don't worry, if we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards, and we'll also be writing a blog post on today's Q&A, so you can always link to that and find that later. All right, one last thing before we dive into today's content. During the webinar, we're going to have audience participation through polling questions. When the polls come up, Nick will present the polls, and then you can participate by clicking in the Votes tab at the bottom of the player. And then after the webinar, we'll share the collective results with you in the post-event Q&A blog I mentioned, and we'll also share that link to that blog with you in an email that we'll send out next week. All right, so with that, let's get on to the content of today's webinar. And Nick, welcome. Thank you so very much for being here today.
Really excited to be here. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Really excited to share some of the insights we've collected. Today, I'm going to cover why benchmarking your recruiting funnel matters and how we calculate the metrics we're sharing today. Then, we'll walk through benchmarks related to outreach, followed by benchmarks for down-funnel pass-through rates, slicing and dicing in a few different ways. Finally, I'll wrap up with a live Q&A, so like Sarah mentioned, be sure to send in your questions as they come up. GEM created our 2020 benchmarking report using data from our database of over 1 million outreach emails and nearly 600,000 candidates who entered process. If you're not familiar with GEM, it's a sourcing tool and recruitment CRM that over 300 top companies like Slack, Dropbox, and Robinhood are using to engage and nurture passive talent. GEM integrates with all the major applicant tracking systems and enables recruiting teams to better track their source of hires and quantify their sourcing efforts. I'll cover some of the findings from our 2020 Tech Benchmarks report, but be sure to take a deeper dive into the report after the webinar. Before we jump to the benchmarks, I want to explore what benchmarking is and why it's important to recruiting. To get a sense of what everyone in this webinar is currently doing or not doing with benchmarks, we've actually got our first poll question. The question is, does your recruiting organization currently measure recruiting performance against benchmarks? You should see this on the right-hand side of your player, and would love for everyone to vote. The options here are, yes, we already use benchmarks, no, we have not used benchmarks, or we don't, but would like to in the future. So wait just a little bit of time for everyone to vote. And great, it looks like we have a few sort of data points here already. Thanks everyone for voting. It actually looks like fairly evenly split. We've got 33%, or about 40% that do use benchmarks, 25% that have not used benchmarks, and then maybe 40% that would like to use them in the future. Well, great. Hopefully we've got something in this presentation for everyone here. So excited to sort of present the rest of this. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so why measure? Well, if you can't measure what you're doing, you won't know what's working for your team or for your prospects or candidates, for that matter. Best-in-class talent teams are tracking metrics nowadays and using them to make data-driven decisions. Sources and recruiters use data to discover what outreach results in the most interested responses. Talent operations can get a bird's-eye view of hiring across the board and shift strategies where needed. And hiring managers can see the health of their individual pipelines, understand where candidates are dropping off, and optimize their process based on data rather than gut instinct. And the entire team can know whether they're on track to hit their hiring goals. So why benchmark? This is a follow-up question because there's actually a difference between tracking internal metrics and benchmarking yourself against your competitors and peers. Most talent acquisition teams we know are using internal comparisons to understand their team's performance, gauging success by percentage of improvement over last quarter or year, for example. And of course, internal comparison makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, if you don't have a wider context for your recruiting data, you can't be confident about whether those numbers are objectively good. Benchmarking tells you the state of recruiting performance for your entire industry. It's how businesses learn potentially hard truths about where they're underperforming, identify important trends, and uncover pain points they may have not known otherwise. With this intelligence, they can implement changes in behavior or strategy, or justify investments in tools or resources to improve those elements of their hiring process that need attention. In that sense, benchmarks are a vital starting place for asking valuable questions about your process. Here are some of the recruiting benchmarks that we're going to walk through today. Benchmarks can give you averages for all the metrics here, but you can also slice and dice these numbers in a few different ways, including gender, department, location, and company size. Most of the numbers you'll see today are based on pre-quarantine data, but we've also got a few slides on the metrics since COVID really hit the U.S. in mid-March, so you can see how some of these activities have temporarily shifted. The first set of benchmarks we'll look at today are around outreach. This is the very top of the recruiting funnel where you're sourcing candidates and sending them emails. At the very top of the recruiting funnel, the first thing to look at is how many people you're reaching out to are even opening your emails. So we took a look at the average open rates across all of our customers by company size. There are actually two different takeaways here. The first is that 87% is an open rate worth aiming for. The second is that there is no direct correlation between open rates and company size. If anything, smaller companies see better open rates across the board. But there's no clear pattern as company size increases. If you'd like to be seeing better open rates than you're seeing now, the two places to focus are send times and subject lines. At GEM, we've published a definitive guide for email outreach that breaks down the best send times by role, also using our own data. And you can find that in the attachment section of your BrightTalk player. But you can also uncover your own best send times through A/B testing and trial and error. When it comes to subject lines, personalization will be your strongest strategy. Personalized subject lines increase open rates by 26%. But experiment. A few ideas here are appealing to curiosity or core values, asking questions in your subject lines, flattery, and humor. Any of these, when done well, are likely to prompt more opens. On this slide, we've broken out open rates by company size and by role. To be clear, these are open rates for a three-stage sequence. In other words, recipients opened at least one of 3 emails they were sent over a given period of time. At GEM, one of the reasons we recommend email sequences is they significantly increase your chances of seeing a response. A 4-email sequence sees more than double response rates than a single email, 35% compared to 15% with just a single email. The other thing worth pointing out is that the data for this benchmarking report was pulled at the end of 2019, way before we could have imagined where we are now. So I'm going to talk through these numbers first because they're the numbers we expect outreach to return to. But to prepare for this webinar, we also pulled some really interesting data from the last month's worth of outreach. And so I'll share what outreach stats have looked like during COVID in a moment. While they don't necessarily see higher open rates, companies with 1,000 plus full-time employees see significantly higher response rates overall. In fact, the data suggests that for most roles, there's a direct correlation between company size and response rates. Maybe this isn't surprising, and of course, we can come up with theories about it. The perceived risk of smaller startups, the fact that larger companies have more brand recognition, or that recruiters at larger companies have more collateral to point to. What this ultimately suggests is that smaller companies will have to work harder in their messaging once talent opens those emails. So get creative with your outreach, work on your company brand and your talent brand wherever and however possible. And of course, know that you'll probably have to work even harder to get a response for your technical roles than you do for your biz roles. Now let's break down reply rates by role. Again, I'll give you a moment to take this in. One thing you might notice is that product and design roles see the highest average response rate. On the other hand, and probably unsurprisingly, engineering and data roles see the lowest average response rates. The benchmarks we are showing on this presentation are just that, benchmarks. But we realize that recruiting in the entire world are facing unusual circumstances right now, and these numbers might temporarily look different. To see just how much the current climate has affected recruiting activity, we analyzed the 30 days prior to most of the U.S. implementing some sort of shelter-in-place to the 30 days after to get you the numbers you'll see on the upcoming slide. But first, a poll. Is your recruiting team building pipeline right now? The options here are yes or no. Again, take a look on the right-hand side of your player to vote here. I'll give everyone a second to vote. All right, wow, 95% so far. That's actually higher than I expected, which is really interesting. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for replying there, everyone. All right. So here's what we're seeing on our side. Across the board, talent teams are sending fewer outreach emails right now. So in March of this year, recruiter outreach was down nearly 50%. And we are seeing a bit of a recovery already, actually, even since we crunched these numbers. The greatest drop in outreach was for sales, success, and biz roles, which saw a 66% average drop across the board. This includes GEM's international customers. A few roles, like for engineering managers in Seattle and the Bay Area, they actually saw only very small drops in outreach, around 8 and 3% respectively. On the other hand, reply rates went up in March across the board. When we slice the data by role and by location, nearly every category saw an increase in reply rates. Here are some roles that saw fantastic reply rates in March. Data science roles saw a 61% increase in reply rates from February to March. In fact, half of all sequences for data science roles saw replies last month. Engineering roles saw a 30% increase in reply rates. Reply rates for product and design roles were up 21% on average. And reply rates for HR and recruiting roles are up 18% on average. All of this suggests that while a lot of companies are having to freeze hiring or cut back on open roles, talent is still looking to keep their options open. And we actually did a survey on LinkedIn in the past week or two to see if people could have guessed these numbers. Interestingly, people guessed the inverse here, which was kind of surprising to me. One explanation here, and as to why this is not intuitive, is that reply rates may have already been higher for, say, product and design, so they actually had like less room to move. At GEM, while we've scaled back some hiring due to the coronavirus, we're actually leaving certain roles open and optimizing our recruiting efforts on top-tier talent. While not every company can keep recruiting at full steam throughout this crisis, the data shows that if you can keep at least some roles open, you'll have a better shot at some of the historically most in-demand talent. And so, it's great that, looking at some of our poll numbers, that a lot of recruiting teams are still have a number of roles open, even during this tough time. So, your outreach, if done well, gets folks at the top of the funnel into process. But what metrics do you use to track them once they've responded as interested? At GEM, we call the signal of interest, as well as passing an application review prior to a phone screen, entering process. Pass-through rates let you analyze the overall health of your funnel and observe where you're experiencing bottlenecks in the form of candidate drop-offs. The recruiting funnel begins with talent sourcing, top of the funnel, and ends with a signed offer, which we're referring to as bottom of the funnel. Now, talent acquisition teams have any number of stages in their hiring funnel, but we looked at 5 for this report: entering process, phone screen, onsite, offer extend, and offer accept. Pass-through rates allow you to understand the health of your overall funnel. With GEM, you can use the data about your funnel to predict outcomes of roles. So now you can answer questions like, how many candidates will we need at each stage of the funnel in order to hire 5 product managers based on historic conversion rates? Here's a screenshot of what it looks like in our product. We could see that if we keep pass-through rates the same as they've been in the past, we'd have to reach out to 10,000 people to hit our goal of 25 hires this quarter. And we can get some additional insights by playing with the calculator. So if we somehow increased our offer accept rate from 55% to 70%, for example, we'd be able to see that we'd only have to reach out to 7,000 people to hit our goal. Here's what the funnel looks like for our aggregate pass-through rates. You'll notice that there are 2 different sets of numbers here, pass-through rates from the very beginning and pass-through rates from the previous stage. So the 10% offer accept in the far right reflects that at the end of the day, 10 out of every 100 people that entered process got all the way through the process and accepted an offer. In between offer extend and offer accept, the 76% number reflects that 76% of people who were extended offers ended up accepting that. Hope that makes sense to everyone. All right, so on average, we found that 40% of phone screens lead to an onsite. If you're far off from 40% in either direction, it may mean either that you need to be more selective in your screening process, otherwise you're taking up precious interviewer time, or that you're being too selective, so not enough candidates are making it onsite. It's worth taking a hard look at your screening process. Are you asking the questions that are getting you the right insights into the candidate? For example, is your hiring manager's list of qualifications too rigorous? We also found that on average, 50% of onsites lead to an offer extend. If you're off in any direction here, here are a few ideas. If you're seeing lower numbers, as with phone screens, determine if interviewers are being too rigorous or too generous in their evaluations. Maybe recruiters and hiring managers aren't aligned on hiring criteria, or there's poor communication between them. Calibrating on ideal responses for each interview question is critical for ensuring that all interviewers are aligned. Another thing to look at is mapping the reasons for rejections at this stage. That will alert you to broader patterns that can help fine-tune your recruiting motion. If the problem is candidate quality, sit down with sourcers and review your screening process. If candidates are choosing to withdraw after onsites, look into the interview experience and hold hiring managers and interview panelists accountable. In terms of offer extend, we found that 75% of offers extended lead to an offer accept. If you're seeing a lower ratio than this, ask for honest feedback from candidates who rejected your offer. Withdrawal reasons can be a number of different possibilities: more competitive offers elsewhere, not effectively selling your company during the process, candidates' perceptions of company culture, or inadequate follow-up after the offer was extended. One obvious area is to revisit your offer letter to make sure that corporate benefits are on par with your industry. Digging into data from exit interviews, which are the reasons employees eventually leave the organization, might also give you insights into what candidates may have perceived, but might potentially have not been able to articulate about your company while in process. It's counterintuitive, but when it comes to debugging your hiring funnel, if you're seeing issues at one stage of your process, the real problem might not be with the current stage. It might be something you need to fix in an earlier stage of your process. So as an example, if comp comes up as an issue in closing and you actually don't have flexibility there, it might be worthwhile to be more upfront with that earlier in the process so you don't waste everyone's time. To get another sense of where folks are wanting to focus, let's do another poll. At what stage of the recruiting funnel is the biggest challenge for your organization? Again, this is on the right-hand side. I'll give everyone just a moment here to respond before moving on. Great, some interesting results here. It looks like the most popular option is phone interviewed to onsite, and then second is onsite to offer. Yeah, these are really really interesting parts of the process. We've got more responses, and now it's onsite to offer is the clear winner. Okay, yeah, this is really interesting, and it's particularly interesting because Onsite's offer is probably one of the parts of the process that has the most moving pieces. You often, in some cases, will have panels or a lot of different interviews. All right, actually, it's swung again. So it's actually a fairly even split, kind of across the board right now, which is also interesting. So that's great. Let's go ahead and keep moving here, and hopefully we'll have some good content for everyone, depending on what they're looking for. Thanks everyone for participating there. All right, so to start, let's look at pass-through rates by company size. Small companies invite fewer candidates on site than larger companies do. 30% versus 44% pass-through rates, but they tend to extend more offers. 48% versus 45% pass-through rates. For larger companies, the moral of this story might actually be take a tip from smaller companies and screen like a startup. On-site interviews are costly, especially for technical roles with panel interview time. Make sure the questions that you ask during your phone screens get as much pertinent information as possible from the candidate, hard skills and soft skills, intelligence and values, and so on. Make sure that recruiters know what red flags to watch out for. Being more selective at the top of the funnel means better on-site to offer extend pass-through rates because you brought the right people in to begin with. Let's take a look at offer accept rates by company size. Looking at these numbers, the smallest companies have to work twice as hard to see as many offer accepts. It's likely this is because smaller companies are a bigger risk. There are a number of ways to offset this risk, whether it's real or perceived. One involves improving the overall candidate experience, using candidate surveys and best practices to determine where in the journey you can be serving your candidates better. Another concerns employee value propositions. Your EVP is the unique set of benefits employees receive in return for their contributions to your company. So clarify what your EVP is, especially if withdrawal data suggests you're losing candidates to competitors. Finally, get candidates as excited about the role as you do about the company. Recent surveys from LinkedIn show that the things candidates most want to know about are the role's expectations and workload, what their personal career trajectory would look like, and what a day in the life entails. Ultimately, they want to be able to envision what a day-to-day experience would be, both tomorrow and 5 years from now, if they were to take the role. So help them see that. Looking at offer accept rates by company location, New York headquartered companies appear to be more discerning at the top of the funnel and extending fewer offers. But they also see fewer offer accepts, which is interesting. I'm actually not sure about the big difference between New York and San Francisco here. If there's one thing I can think of, it might be that New York has more demand for the type of talent our customers typically recruit for, and the talent market hasn't caught up with that recent increase in demand, potentially from tech companies like Google, Facebook, and others growing their New York offices. But let's hone in on the offer data for using pass-through rates from the beginning of the process. The biggest takeaway is that it's much harder for San Francisco and New York-based companies to usher candidates through the end of the funnel. Companies in the other location category extend significantly more offers than those in New York and San Francisco, 75% versus 50 and 51% respectively. And candidates are more likely to accept those offers, 10% more likely than for San Francisco companies, and over 20% more likely than for New York companies. So this is something worth calling out on its own slide. Broadly speaking, there's a top-of-the-funnel problem when it comes to gender diversity in sourcing. Across our data, more than 2x as many male candidates enter process as female candidates. Unfortunately, this data squares with other studies in the recruiting industry. LinkedIn's 2018 Gender Insights report, for example, found that recruiters, regardless of their own gender, are 13% less likely to click on a woman's profile when she shows up in a search. Although we don't have benchmarks to report on non-binary gender pass-through rates, I want to call out that it is important to GEM both in how we do our own hiring and how we build out our product that we consider diversity. And so we hope to be able to report on non-binary benchmarks in the future. Meanwhile, I'd like to call out that if you're a GEM customer today or looking for a product to help you with diversity hiring initiatives, GEM does help teams track and report on their success with top-of-funnel diversity sourcing. What's interesting, though, and in fact really heartening, is that female candidates pass through subsequent stages at better rates. In other words, while fewer women are entering into the process, the ones that do enter seem to outperform their male counterparts. The story this tells is that unconscious bias has the strongest impact on the gender gap in the stages before recruiters actually speak with candidates, sourcing and application review. Companies that care about diversity should spend more time nurturing diverse talent pools at the top of the funnel. And they should hold their teams accountable to reaching out to a diverse set of talent at the top of the funnel. At the very top of the funnel, one of the most valuable things you can do is put recruiters through an unconscious bias training. The data shows that unconscious bias exists even for URM and female-identified recruiters. Helping recruiters become aware of their own beliefs and assumptions might change the way they relate to female and non-binary profiles when they show up in searches. If your offer accept rates for female-identified talent are subpar, your most valuable asset may be internal data about candidate withdrawal or offer rejection reasons. You should be asking all candidates who withdraw from process to be honest about their reasons for doing so. But for female-identified candidates or other specific segments that you're digging deeper into, examining withdrawal reasons can be particularly insightful. Were they turned off by company culture? Did the comp package not meet their expectations? What investments might you need to make from more inclusive practices to increase female representation at the leadership level to increase the offer accept rate for female candidates? The last benchmark I'll show you today is pass-through rates by department. In the graph above, you'll see total pass-through rates from enter process to offer accept. So, in other words, 38 candidates have to enter process to make a single hire in data science, but for sales and CS, only 12 people have to enter process to make a single hire. If benchmarks suggest that your struggle to fill a particular role is on par with the industry, start nurturing prospects and building pipeline for that role now. If your pass-through rates aren't on par, it's probably time to dig into your people and processes to understand why you're experiencing drop-offs that your competitors aren't. I'd like to quickly highlight how GEMS metrics can help you understand your recruiting funnel and build strategies to move the needle. GEMS outreach stats lets you track how your outreach communications are faring. It gives you open rates, reply rates, and interested rates broken down by message content, talent pool, and even the recipient's gender to see how your messaging resonates with different populations over any given time period. Did your team kick off a targeted campaign 2 weeks ago? See how it's performing now. Is one source's outreach converting candidates at higher rates than others? Dig into their messaging to share tips with the rest of the team. You can also use outreach stats to manage your team's top-of-funnel output. Outreach stats tracks your LinkedIn profiles viewed and the number of prospects added to GEM, as well as the number of prospects contacted, followed up with, and more for any given time period per recruiter. It's also possible to break down by diversity. So, as we were discussing earlier, it's now possible for your team to hold themselves accountable for reaching out to a diverse set of talent at the top of the funnel. If you include links in your outreach messages through GEM, which we highly encourage as a way to showcase what's great about your company, you'll be able to track how prospects engage with that content. So link to that blog post written by your female head engineer, or to the article about your recent round of funding, or to a page about your core values, and then use content stats to discover what content compels prospects to click and which clicks lead to replies. All of this data will better inform your outreach strategy, as well as help you control your talent brand. Whereas outreach stats allows you to analyze your team's top-of-funnel activity, Pipeline Analytics, GEM's analytics platform that's fully integrated with your applicant tracking system, allows you to view your full funnel from initial reach out to hire. Pipeline Analytics combines all of GEM's outreach data with all of your applicant tracking system's candidate data in order to help you answer questions like, how many offers accepted did a specific recruiter on our team get in Q4? Or what are our pass-through rates from phone screen to onsite for software engineers in the Austin office since the beginning of the year? And how does that compare against the quality of candidates coming into your pipeline? Yeah, this is kind of an interesting piece. I think one thing I would just sort of call out here is that I think right now it's kind of a lot of inbound pipeline. We're definitely hearing some customers sort of starting to shift a lot towards processing more of that inbound pipeline. I think it's important to mention that inbound is generally low. For most companies at least, it tends to be lower quality than sort of what you would get by sourcing. So So one sort of thing I would suggest there is to make sure that if your team has historically done sourcing, to make sure to keep that up, because like we sort of mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot higher reply rates right now. So even sort of aspirational hires that you might have not been able to make before COVID, you actually might have a better shot at right now. So that's one thing to call out. Another thing to call out is just in terms of where you're posting your job rec. So following up on where potentially the lower quality leads are coming from, and making sure that, if, for example, you're posting in a place that just gets you lower quality leads, making sure that you are sort of careful about, the audience that you're putting that job in front of.
That makes sense. Thanks. Time for today. Nick, thank you so much for your time and for sharing these benchmarks with us today. And thank you to our audience for your attention and the great questions. I wish everyone a wonderful day.